And as we're waiting that minute, if folks want to chime into the chat of where they're beaming in from, I am just outside of Boston. Nice. Toronto, New York. It's always fun to see where people are. Sometimes we have people from all kinds of time zones, all kinds of places. So always a really good mix. Nice. Atlanta, Ottawa. Always like a surprisingly strong Canadian contingent joining these, which is really exciting for us. All right. Well, with that, we can get started, and anyone who's joining can hop in as we're going. Hi, everyone. So great to have you here for our session today called Championing the ROI of UX with two incredible speakers and longtime friends of DScout. We've got Dr. Nikki Smith from Enterprise and Greg Marinelli from JPMorgan Chase. Just want to kick it off with a couple quick housekeeping notes. As you heard Zoom say before, we are recording this session and it'll be shared out afterwards. You should see it in your inbox within 24 hours. And just want to let everyone know we will have plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So, please post any questions you have for Greg, Dr. Nikki, in the Q&A box along the bottom bar of your Zoom screen. When it comes time to do Q&A, I'll unmute, the folks who had left their questions and kind of call on you to ask directly if you'd like to. That way you can ask them directly to our speakers and it'll be a little more collaborative of a back and forth versus your typical webinar Q&A. So excellent. And so with that, we can get started. I'll introduce myself quickly and then hand it over to our speakers to introduce themselves. My name is Colleen Pate. I am the Customer and Community Manager here at DScout. My pronouns are she, her. At DScout, we also like to do a quick visual description for folks with any visual impairments or have any accessibility needs or might just be listening in without visuals. Dialing in from Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm wearing a navy blue long sleeve top with a silver necklace, glasses, and have long reddish hair. So I will hand it over to our first speaker, Dr. Nikki, if you'd like to share your name, title, pronouns, quick description, and a little bit about yourself.
Yes. Hey, everybody. I do want to, before I introduce myself, there was a question in the chat about UX or UXER. And so I just want to be sure everyone knows I'm an experience research manager. So we are definitely going to be talking experience research in general and not just UX. So in case there was a couple questions in the chat about that, but I am Dr. Nikki Smith. As I said, I'm the experience research manager over at Enterprise Mobility. All my enterprise friends are definitely in the chat. So excited to see them. We are a pretty substantial company. You may have heard of us. We have quite a few lines of business, but really excited to be leading the team there. I go by she, her pronouns. What else was it, Colleen, that you wanted me to say? Oh, one of the questions for sure is what my PhD is in or what I'm a doctor in. So my PhD is in business management with a focus in innovation and strategy. So my dissertation work was around how does experience design and design thinking enable business model innovation. So thinking about huge events that may happen and how a business can pivot. So definitely come from some strong business acumen side, but also a trained researcher and had spent the majority of my career as of late in the field of CX. So really excited to be here.
Excellent. And then Greg, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Yes, hello, folks. My name is Greg Marinelli. I am an executive director of user experience research at JPMorgan Chase, specifically in Chase's consumer banking products. That's just the bank's fancy way of saying checking and savings accounts, essentially. So anything that has to do with the Octagon and checking and savings accounts related to Chase, my team probably has some part in exploring the customer experience there. I've been at Chase for coming up on 7 years now. Before that, I was in the startup world, actually in the medical cannabis industry in Honolulu, Hawaii. I also am, I have some advanced degrees. I am a JD MBA, so I have a law degree and a master's in business, and I am a bar certified attorney in the state of New York, although I don't actively practice currently. I'm coming to you, my pronouns are he, him. I'm coming to you live from my home office in Connecticut here. I am a white man wearing a color-blocked sweater. I tend to normally have multicolored hair. Today it's kind of boring. I need to go back to the salon. It's just a boring brown today, soon to change, I'm sure.
Excellent. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. We have a really great session planned with Dr. Nikki and Greg sharing their insights and experiences, not only as research leaders, but as they've alluded to, leaders who have placed a premium on business thinking as they've continued to grow through their careers. So today we're going to hear from them both on how business thinking and speaking that language of the business has opened up opportunities for them, how it shaped their cross-team collaboration and partnerships, why it's so important for research and insight leaders to own how the impact of their work is communicated out, and much more. Great. So let's dive in. I would love to hear from each of you to just kind of set the stage a little bit with some more context for the audience. We do know that research has a different role at different types of organizations. And something that really stuck with me from some of our prep conversations was hearing from you, Dr. Nikki, when you said that, your team discovers and delivers insights to drive action. So I'd love to hear kind of how the research team is set up at Enterprise Mobility and how your team's role has been defined. And then, of course, Greg, you don't need my permission to hop right in.
Yeah, so a little bit, I am really proud of my team, and my team knows this, but I'm also really proud of the structure of our team. CX has been around for a while, and a couple of large companies were starting to start these CX departments, and we were thinking about the structure. And I wasn't at Enterprise at this time, but I've seen the evolution of it and really proud of where we landed, as where we have sort of a discovery practice where we figure out what is the pain and how big is it and what's the impact that we could drive from solving for that pain. And then we have a generative part of our practice in which we're understanding context, expectations of our customers, and really starting to define what those measurable opportunities are for us to go then solution. And then, of course, we have typical evaluative in our practice, and this is where you would see more traditional UX. We want to understand how are people interacting with a thing, right? And how can we make it better? And then we have a part of our discipline that handles optimization. And so thinking about how do we optimize this experience? And I'm really excited to say that design and product are along with us every step of the way in each of those different disciplines. And because we've been able to have really strong partnerships with those teams and loop them in at the point of us deciding our research objectives, and loop them in at the point of concept testing, as well as more UX evaluative testing down the way, they've been able to, one, be advocates of the work along the way, but really help us make decisions and make sure that we're scoping our research and focusing our objectives on things that are going to be actionable for their teams. And so that has been a great win for us in terms of structurally how we've been able to work with other teams and how we've been able to set ourselves up for success.
Yeah, I think similarly at JPMorgan Chase, we're a giant organization. We have, close to 300,000 total employees. But having been at Chase now for close to 7 years, when I joined, the UX component of Chase was under 100 people, which is still a substantial size. We have about 1,000 UX practitioners now working full-time on Chase products, and about 140 researchers specifically. So that's quite a large organization holistically. I will echo Dr. Nikki's sentiments here that one of the reasons that we're able to be successful is because we really have integrated with what we call our quad partners, right? So the quad is design, capital D, representing designers, content strategists, and researchers, product, tech or dev, and data and analytics, right? And we make decisions together. We think about what types of items we want to research together, what we want to learn together, what our strategic priorities are together. So we're all working toward a common goal. Sometimes more successfully than other times, of course, but that's the gold standard that we're all working toward.
Absolutely. And I think, during our various conversations getting ready for this, one thing I did hear from both of you, but especially Greg, was, as as these research teams are working with other teams and delivering insights to inform the rest of the business, it's to inform them on, where to go forward and where to keep building, but then also what not to do. So I'm wondering if you could shed a little bit of light on that, because I'm sure that's something that our audience can relate to.
Yeah, absolutely. As Dr. Nikki alluded to, our research is really only valuable if it's actionable, in my opinion. And that is when we talk about the ROI or the impact of user experience or user experience research, one of the primary ways we provide value is making sure that our work is actionable and our partners can do something and we can do something with our research. The phrase that I like to use all the time is we don't produce book reports, right? We don't simply talk to customers and then write down a list of things that the customer said. And so we really are effective when we're able to identify, take those insights, turn them into recommendations that are actionable, tangible, tactical. But we talk a lot on our team about what we're not going to do as well. And you can see on the slide here, this idea of research asking as a risk mitigation team. This is something that I focus on with my team quite a bit as a large impact and ROI driver. We have 1,000 ideas at Chase, 100,000 ideas at Chase of things we could do, but we can only do 3 of them, right? We can't do 1,000 ideas. And so what we say no to, or maybe not no, but not yet to, is almost infinitely more important than what we say yes to. And part of our job as a research team is to help our partners decide where should they spend their resources and their priorities and their time on. If one of the things we're able to do is say, here are a bunch of things that are probably not as valuable to the customer experience, probably not as impactful, right, to our usability metrics, probably won't really drive revenue or decrease expenses in the way that you're hoping. Let's not use our time, money, and resources there. Let's use it on other things that will provide more value. And our being able to steer our partners to more valuable projects is an impact and is a return on investment for our work.
Yeah. And Greg, I would even say, let's say you're not close enough to where you don't know maybe the ROI and you maybe don't know some of these numbers and you can't talk in terms of finance and how it's really going to maybe drive impact on the bottom line. What you can do is always bring it back to what are the implications to the customer experience. If we were to do this idea, this is what we think the experience will be, and this is what we think the impact will be based on, like I said, that discovery, that generative research that we had done before. Should we not do this? This is what the implications are going to be to the customer experience. Even if you can't drive it back to the things that Greg maybe touched on, you could definitely drive it back to say, okay, let's say we put this on the table for the roadmap this year, and then push this back this year. This will impact the experience in this way. And we know that because we're the researchers and we're the ones talking to the customers, but also using some of your big data to maybe validate some of that as well to really tell the story. And I think even if, you're not close enough to or have enough of the business acumen, you can always drive help your stakeholders understand implications by helping them understand what the customer experience is going to be.
Yeah. And I think that really leads us nicely into the next slide about, business thinking, and how it can really help enhance and be like an additional tool, for researchers. So I would love to hear from both of you of like, high level for folks who might not know, what is business thinking, in the way that you think about it? And then why is it so critical, particularly for researchers, before we keep going?
Yeah, so I would say, when I think about business thinking, you have to I'm basically asking myself, why should the company care? Or why would my stakeholder care about this piece of information? And it may not be anything that's specifically driving ROI. It ultimately it will and it should, as Greg will talk about later. But you definitely want to be able to talk about not only the specific ROI, but making sure that you're thinking about the how the customer is engaging with us and the as I mentioned, the implications. You also want to understand what's important to your stakeholders, what's on their roadmap, so that we are working on the same thing, we are prioritizing the same thing. Because if research is just working on something in a silo and we say, hey guys, we learned this cool new information about our customers, there's a lot of work and a lot of lift to get someone to care when they don't already. And so if we were to align ourselves at the beginning about what our priorities are, and part of that is business thinking, right? Not just thinking about what's in front of you, but having the foresight to see around the corner and be able to align yourselves with your other partners.
Definitely. And then
Yeah,
go ahead, Greg.
I think, Colleen, one other item around business thinking that's often overlooked is just the language that we use. The language we use is very important. I'm sure all of us have been involved in a conversation with one of our partners where they've been trying to talk about research and just have clearly demonstrated that they don't understand what we do, or they don't understand best practices, or they don't understand the outcomes that we are trying to achieve through our research.
Yeah.
I'm not casting, aspersions on those individuals, but all that to say, let's think about it in the reverse context now, right? You have your business partners or your data analytics partners or your tech partners, and you're going to them and talking about their work and their priorities. If you're not using language that is, familiar to them,
Yeah.
if you are showing yourself to be naive within their area of expertise, it's a lot harder to form those relationships with them. It's a lot harder for them to trust the recommendations that you're providing.
Mhm.
Instead, if I'm able to go to my partner and talk about, the percentage of engagement that's able to be that we might grow as a result of this work, if I'm able to talk about, contribution margins across our organization that may be affected by a different distribution of how we do research, like that, all of a sudden their ears perk up and they say, okay, you understand what I'm thinking about,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
I'm willing to listen to you now. Like, you've shown yourself to have spent a little bit of time understanding what I do. So you can see here on the screen some of the things that we recommend: reading through shareholder reports and 10Ks, right? Going to finance meetings and listening to how they talk about earnings and expenses, getting familiar with how some of these business metrics are calculated, right? It's one thing to say we want to affect our return on investment or NPS or year over year expenses. Do you know how those are calculated? Do you know the things that go into those? Just having a better understanding of that will build better partnerships.
Yeah, I was gonna say sometimes, especially with the language researchers, we can be very academic, especially as PhDers. And so
No, what?
and so you have to be clear in your language and use plain speak probably more often than not. Because sometimes we create these decks and then not my team because we're fabulous, but others maybe we create these decks and the design team and product is looking at it like, what does this mean for me? What should I do with this? And an insight should be insightful. It should encourage you and inspire action. And if we're not using, like what Greg said, if we're not using that business language, if we're not showing that we're leaned in, we are
Mhm.
partners in this. We're not just researchers and we're the know all be all of all things customer. We want to lean in because our research can't sit on the shelf. Someone has to do something with it, and that someone has to be able to understand it. And so that's why it's so important for us to lean into who that discipline is, and as well as for us to want to have that same understanding.
Well said.
Absolutely. And so I think you both, did this excellent job of talking about why it's so important in your role. And just to kind of zoom in a little more and almost be a little bit selfish, can you dive in even briefly on why business thinking how it's been helpful for both of you personally as you've been, growing your careers?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'll be very honest about this. I am not the most skilled researcher at Chase, right? That's just the fact of the matter. I take great pride in my ability as a researcher and to talk through research with the people that report to me and my peers. But there are people who have spent more years doing research than I have. one of the valuable skill sets that I bring to my team and to my organization is my ability to connect the research and the strategic work that we do to our business functions and to our business priorities, to be able to speak that language, to build these relationships, to understand how we can make an impact. So that's been very impactful and helpful for my own career. I will also say for probably everyone on this call, especially in a more corporate sense, if you are trying to go up the corporate ladder, you will hit a plateau at some point where unless you start learning about finances and business goals and business values, you cannot progress higher. You will hit a wall and you will not be allowed to progress if you do not show the requisite skill or ability to learn some of these things. You'll just get to a point where it's too essential to your job. Your job is far enough removed from the actual research, and your job is now more about resourcing and prioritization and strategic vision for the organization. You need to be able to understand these things to be in those rooms with those folks, having those conversations and advocating for yourself and your team.
Yeah. Greg, I caught all of what you said. Colleen, I think I missed the first part of your question, so I want to be sure that I answer it correctly.
Yeah, I would just love to, hear, Dr. Nikki, from you of how business thinking has been like impactful for your career personally outside of like the context of your role itself.
Yeah, so it's helped me specifically really position the work that I do really strategically, because I'm having those conversations with other partners, mentors. I'm asking them, what's important to you, what could you, if you understood this more, would that be helpful for you? If we were able to get you some feedback from customers on how they felt about that, would that information be helpful? And these aren't, I'm not positioning myself to go out and curate and do research studies. I'm trying to get into their heads and really understand what's important, because sometimes when people hear research, they think, like many people think, very academic, very rigorous, and takes forever. But if you say, what questions do you have? Or what feedback can I give you? Or if you got a deeper understanding of that, would that be helpful? And so when you reposition it through these relationships, through the conversations, I then have been able to use that and really position myself and the team to say, well, you need us. You need something like this because, hey, you said you had these questions. You said you needed this deeper understanding. Product is saying they're not really sure how customers are going to receive this or interact with this and make sure they're building the right thing. So research is important in that, because we can go out and figure that out for you in a way that gives you not only just the answer to the question, but context around it. And so having that business language, having that relationships help me position myself and the team, because often CX organizations are very new in some of these large companies. And so I've been in situations at Wells Fargo and other places where you got to make the sell. And so part of that is making sure that you know why people should care, and using that information to like strategically place yourself to say, we can deliver on that and we can give you exactly what you're looking for.
Absolutely. And I think that leads in really nicely to like when we're talking about what research delivers in terms of impact, like what the types of impacts are. And so I think, these 4 types of impacts were kind of pulled out in our different conversations as we were prepping for the session. So I'm wondering, Greg, leading with you, if you can kind of walk us all through this of, what would you say to folks who might only be focused right now on one of these types of impacts or just an indirect impact as opposed to multiple or all 4?
Yeah, I think this is a framework that I use to think about the different types of impact that my team and broadly speaking, our UX team has. I know there was a question at the very beginning, are we talking about UX research or UX? Mostly we're talking about research here, but I've also managed cross-functional design, content, research teams, so I understand the perspective of a broader UX leader as well. I like to think about impact as having direct results and indirect results. Typically, when people think about the return, the ROI of our work, they're thinking about business results, right? How much money did we make? How many expenses did we save? Those are business results, right? How many customers did we add? How many customers did we prevent from attriting? But there are also customer and user impacts, right? These are usability scores. These are engagement metrics. These are the metrics that we look at to understand whether a customer experience is more or less successful, right? But there are also equally important indirect results that we as either individual researchers or as research managers, you should be following and tracking these just as importantly. Are you making a process impact, right? So is your work changing the way that your organization does work? Is it changing the way that your partners think about the process of decision making? And then finally, are you building empathy? Right? This seems like the simplest one, but is really important. Are your partners learning more about your customers holistically? Right? That is a return on your investment. You might not be able to tie it one to one to we generated X amount more revenue, but over the long term, right, you are building an organization that understands your customers better, and as a result can more naturally make informed contextual decisions about what they should and should not do. And that's really our job there. I think the error that too many people make is they only report the direct results and they think that the indirect results are not important. Or inversely, at the end of the year in either their goals or their self-reviews, they talk about the indirect results and they don't take credit for the direct results of the team. I think we'll talk about that in just a moment as well.
Yes. And I think as we kind of are on the last point in terms of building empathy, that leads in really nicely of something you both alluded to earlier about the criticality of cross-team partnerships. So I think, we all know that partnership is something that's so essential for a research team success. And I'd love for us to spend some time just going back and forth on the topic of building those partnerships of, how do you both go about building these as leaders and really seeing research as an opportunity for collaboration. And I think we'll start with you, Dr. Nikki.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that's important, it's really easy to kind of reach around a corner. It's easy for me to start to say, go to talk to your partners and figure out what's important to them. But more importantly, before you even go over there and have that conversation, you need to figure out who you are as a team and what kind of what your mission, vision, what you stand for, what your outcomes are going to be, defining kind of the discipline of research. And in many cases, that's already defined for you, but you have to be very clear on what your team is and what they're doing and and what they're delivering, so that when you go and talk to these partners, you can communicate that to them and it's very clear to them. And you have to be consistent in your messaging. And so sometimes, again, I've been in a lot of situations, obviously you can tell where my team is new to a large organization. So we're like a small startup in a large organization. And I have to do a road show, or I kind of position myself to do a road show. And I say, I'll go and have the conversations and figure out what is on the product roadmap, what's on the design roadmap. And then I'll create our research roadmap that's in alignment with that. And then I'll say, here's our research team, here's what we're about, here's some projects we've done in the past, insights we've driven, action we've driven, some solutioning we've done, different types of research methodology. But basically, I have about 3 or 4 slides. And at any point, at any time, I can go to any team and say, this is how I think we can help or partner together. And it's very clear to them. The message is consistent. So when design and product are talking to each other, they know exactly what research can provide for them. When tech and IT are in a room, they know exactly what research can provide. And so it's really clear for us to be clear on who we are so we can communicate that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add on top of that, or just to reiterate, every time I'm having these conversations, especially with new partners, it's about starting with the value to my partner, right? I'm almost never talking about here is what I want to do, here is what I think that we should be doing, here's how you can help me. It's how can my work help you make better decisions, right? You're really important. Your decisions matter. What can I do to help you make better decisions? And forming a partnership that way.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, something that's super helpful that I don't see super often. I wish I did, was examples of how that's worked in the past. Because sometimes, when you go in these conversations, another thing I've noticed is they don't have a frame of reference to give
Yeah.
you. They might be just setting up a new designer product team, or this is new for them to work with a research team. And so it's more important for them to say, here's how we have done this in the past. Here's some projects and some frames of
Mhm.
reference for them so that they can say, oh, okay, we want to do something like that. And a lot of times that's how we kind of get a lot of work. It's because word of mouth. So,
But Dr. Nikki, I imagine when you're having those conversations, it's also very helpful to be able to, as the researcher, have a business perspective on the
oh, yeah,
matter, right? Because now, if you have a new partner, and if you show up to a new partner and you don't understand the business at all, or you don't understand their objectives, now you're just talking past each other, and
right.
that's not going to be helpful at all. Or you have two people who are really not sure what they're doing at that point.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I said when I'm doing my road show, first I'm doing my homework. First, I'm going out and figuring out what's important, and then I'm packaging that up and doing my road show and saying, this is who we are, and this is how we can help you
Yeah, there's just a
specifically.
certain level of thoughtfulness and
Yeah,
preparation that can't be, you can't fake it, right?
yeah,
Shows through.
yep.
Absolutely. And I think this brings us to, an interesting final point of as we're thinking about that importance of business thinking and as researchers are adopting that more business oriented viewpoint, how can they use it to really own the impact that they're making? Something that really stuck with me that you mentioned, Greg, as we were getting ready for this was saying that research can take a lesson from marketing. I think I'm obviously biased, I am a marketer, but so I'd really love for you to dive into what you mean by that phrase of like how can or should research learn from marketing or similar teams when we're talking about things like owning and showcasing the really like profound impacts they can have on a business.
Yeah. So I think it's tied to this first bullet you have up here about research as a team sport as well, and just product design and the work that we do, generally speaking, as a team sport. When you think about a team sport, I don't know, let's pick one, basketball. There are 5 people on the court on a team. If you don't have a full team and you only have 3 people on the court, I mean, I guess in theory you could play, but right, typically like you forfeit that game, right? Either the whole team is there participating or nobody wins, right? And so one thing that marketing research and marketing generally has been very good at historically is pointing toward a project and saying, we were involved in that project. We were a player on the team. The team won the championship, or the team went 11-2, right? They don't have to say, look, I did this specific work and that contributed to a net 2.5 wins over the season. They say, we as a team went 11-2 and won the championship. And without us, right, the team probably doesn't win the championship because we can't field a team. It's the same way here. We need to take ownership over the success of our full team, not just the specific research projects we do. So if your team launches a new product, you launched a new product this year. Without you, that doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen as well, right? If you decided not to do something, you decided that, not some ambiguous stakeholder off in a corner. Take ownership over that. And sure, you don't have to say in your end of your review, I made this decision to launch this product. That's not true. Please don't lie. Don't do that. But take ownership over your part on the team, right? That's the point that I'm trying to get across here. And the last point I'll add here is being an advocate in advance is one way you can do this. So one thing that we are particularly keen about here at Chase is we bring the whole team together, right, to talk about planning and prioritization and resourcing, and are very clear to say, all right, we have 5 projects, right? Let's take an example. If we don't have enough people from research to support this project, we're not going to do it, which is fine. Maybe that's okay. But here's the amount of money that we're leaving on the table potentially by doing that, right? That's advocating for yourself in advance. That's showing the impact of your work before you've done any work by saying, if you don't let us do this work, or if you don't hire an additional person to do this work, here's all of the return that you're leaving on the table. And instead, if you invest this money, here is the return on the project that you can scope and plan out now. So we're very keen on doing that. We're very specific about it. And it's one of the best ways that we show the value in our work, because it's not just us advocating for it, it's our product partners, our data and our engineering partners all sitting together, all looking at our senior leaders and saying, we need these people or we can't do the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that, Greg, is, it doesn't make sense for us to have these partnerships if all we're doing is asking them how they can help us, how they can help us, how we can help them, how we can help them. And it if we're not then using them to help us start to tell the story of how did we help them, how did that research move conversion. And so it's important for us to lean into the conversation of making sure that we understand how research can drive business value, but also using our partners in product and design and circling back and saying, what did that then do, and staying abreast on that and staying locked in with those teams so that we can tell the story about not just that we did 50 research studies. I promise you, no one cares. Okay. You don't ever put you did 117, delivered 117 recommendations on what, no one cares. What you need to do is say created insights that drove action, resulting in a 15% lift in conversion. And you know that because you went and talked to your product friend. Or you can say, help de-risk a product launch based on getting feedback from key customer segments. There's no numbers involved in that, but it tells a better story. And you're using your teams out, your partnerships, to be able to chime in and add to that. And so you can start to build it along the way. And that way you can see from end to end what your work is doing. And that's where you create those success stories that I was talking about. I can't do my roadshow until I have something to show. And so having those relationships and having those success stories about how we drove action and what that action resulted into, because I talked to my friend, then I can tell a better story. And that's really how you start to, and for me, that was the lesson for marketing, because marketing tells a good story.
Excellent. Well, I really think, especially where we just ended, has a lot of already some interest in the chat. So I think we can, transition with our last 7 minutes over to the Q&A portion of the programming. So if anyone has questions as we go, feel free to submit them in the Q&A box. If you'd like to ask it yourself, just make sure you use your name so I can unmute you and give you speaking permissions. But we do have a few anonymous ones first that I will just take the lead in asking. And this is something that's coming up in the chat as well. How do either of you estimate the value that's being left on the table, or the value that's been added? Like how do you kind of go about getting those actual real dollar estimates when you're like quantifying value for the business?
Yeah, I work with my finance partners who spend all day thinking about how to quantify these things. So we will sit down again as a quad. So it's not just us, it's our product partners, our engineering, our data partners, because part of the calculation of this are how many headcount might we need to accomplish this project, right? How long will it take? How many hours? What sort of tech resources might be included? What sort of new infrastructure might we need to purchase? And then we try and estimate the outcomes of this initiative, right? We're going to add X number of customers. We're going to increase digital app engagement by X amount. And we have internal metrics that we use, right? We know roughly if we add a customer, we know the average lifetime value of a given customer. Sometimes those lifetime values change based on the type of customer. But our finance partners know that information. They can look at that information and say, all right, if we add X number of customers, if we increase engagement by this amount, we would expect to grow revenue by Y%, or we would expect to decrease expenses by Z%, or we would expect a 10% decrease in customer complaints, for example. And we know that every single time someone calls our call center, it costs $3.25, or what, I'm making up a number there. So great, we're going to reduce calls by X% times $3.20 equals a savings of X dollars. If we're reducing that many calls, maybe we can reduce the number of call center employees we have. That saves us Y number of dollars. And it's literally line by line thinking through the implications like this and getting to an actual number. Here's the hidden secret. That number doesn't have to be perfect. No one's looking at that number in 6 months and saying, was it correct to the penny value? What you're trying to do is get to somewhere directionally, right? Where a leader can look at that number and say, all right, I understand the rough estimate of what this is expected to cost or the value to us. I can make a more informed decision based on that. It's the same as the rest of your research. You are rarely in research getting to the correct, perfect 100% answer, right? You are decreasing the amount of risk in the decision that partners are trying to make. I think someone else asked a question about risk. We are decreasing the risk of the decisions that our partners are making. And by quantifying the business results and the money and the revenue and the customers, you're de-risking that decision.
I actually don't have anything to add there. That was great.
We have a question in the chat from Raisa, so I'll actually just unmute them if they want to ask. I know we are running tight on time, but so yeah, Raisa, if you want to ask your question, the floor is all yours.
Hi, sure. So you talk about the getting the impact of the research, and I wonder if you have like a process to do that, like a checking process after handling the research insights to the requesters to know better this impact. Like how does that work for you?
Yeah, I would say specifically for me, this is because this is part of like, I keep saying roadmap, but because I know what is being where I've talked to my product friends and design friends, and we've gotten a room and we've aligned our roadmaps. And so I know when work is starting and work is ending on a particular effort, because my researchers are aligned with that effort. And so when the effort is over, there's opportunity for us, but we're still working. We're still working on new efforts. We're still in lock and step. There's certainly opportunity where that team is starting to report out the health. We call it a health check of our product health check. And so they're doing health checks on their products, and they're saying this is where conversion is, this is where this is, click rate throughs, and all of this, open rates for our apps, and that sort of thing. And so they're sending that information back. This is all part of like, you create sort of this community, and I guess you called it a quad, Greg, but you create the community where you guys are talking to each other, and that's part of like, we're trying to remove a little bit of these barriers that researchers have, because we are often and I heard it at D Scouts collab, we feel like we're in a silo, but sometimes we put ourselves there. We should go out and talk to people, align our roadmap, so we know when projects are ending, we know when they're out in the world, and when they're reporting back their findings and their health checks on their products, we're staying locked in step. And so we can use that to then tell our story as well. So we just have to stay connected, really.
Yeah, the same thing at Chase. I mean, we are constantly connected. I think we try and align on what the metrics are that we're going to measure post-launch before the launch, right? And this way, as we go, and this is very important for our mid-year reviews and our end-year reviews and our goal setting, we are expected to be tracking those things and to be going back and documenting, we did this work, here is where it was successful. And here are the metrics that prove that it was successful. And I think that you find that the most successful folks at Chase are the ones who are taking the time to build those relationships, go back and track, ask for those metrics, record them, write them down throughout the year, and then they have them ready to go at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. I know we're almost at time with our very final question. I think this one's probably going to go to you, Dr. Nikki, since you did mention, the generative research you do. It's of interest to one of our attendees of calculating ROI for generative research. Is there a different way that you've approached it when you've been, running generative studies?
So short answer, no. And the reason why is because generative research for us is just one step in the research process. So we don't stop and start with generative. And so when we get to, as I mentioned kind of at the beginning, we have discovery, generative, and then evaluative and optimization. Really, when you get to evaluative and optimization, that's where your numbers start to come up. And so you're using sort of your big data to say, here's the big pain and here's the impact we could make if we solve for this pain. Generative, again, is understanding that context. So there's not a ROI that I know of that I would use or feel confident using in that stage of research. I would feel more confident using something like ROI and things when you start to think about usability, click rates, conversion, that sort of stuff downstream.
Yeah, I might push back just a little, Dr. Nikki. I think the one
Okay.
place where I tend to use some type of ROI or impact metrics with generative research is when we are saying no or deprioritizing projects, because typically
fair.
those projects have a budget allocated to them. And so we know how much money we're saving the company by not doing that thing, right?
Yep.
So we've, in the past, we've had projects that we're going to launch and be pilots in a certain number of branches, for example. And by stopping that and saying no, we've been able to point to very clearly, like, look, these type of pilots normally cost, I don't know, $10 million or whatever. Well, that's $10 million we didn't spend this year on a shitty idea, right? So chalk that up. That's our impact. That's our success, right? And we're going to take credit for that.
Yeah, and I think that's Greg, I think that's a great point. It's not my reality to
That's fair.
where
That's fine.
but I think that's a great perspective for sure. I didn't even think about because we do drive evidence-based decisions, and de-risking is part of that.
Yep.
Well, thank you both, and thank you everyone for joining. Dr. Nikki and Greg, thank you for sharing your insights and experiences today. I feel like we could probably have this conversation forever, but does have to come to an end. To everyone who dialed in, you will receive a recording from DScout in the next 24 hours. If you ever want to rewatch or want to forward over to your team, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And then I know Katie dropped a link in the chat if you'd ever want to join the People Nerd Slack community, where we can kick off these kinds of conversations amongst ourselves all the time. So have a great rest of your day, everyone, and really hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, folks. Go do work you're proud of.
Bye,
Bye, everyone.